The first time I felt the forest breathing around me, I didn't want to admit it. The air was too still for breath, too cold for the kind of warmth that presses against your skin like a living thing. But that night, the whisper of the pines moved as if answering a question I had never asked aloud. Even now, after 19 seasons in these woods, I can't tell you whether the sound came from the trees or something standing between them, listening. My name isn't important. I've learned the forest refuses to remember us anyway. It holds on to our footprints for a moment, then swallows them under pine needles and frost, as if reminding us we're only visitors here, no matter how long we think we've belonged. I started ranger work in my early 20s, full of the kind of certainty that only youth can justify. I believed rules kept you safe. Maps told the truth. Trails stayed where you left them. Sounds belonged to animals, and animals behaved like animals. Life out here has corrected me, piece by piece. I work the northern quadrant of the Bitter Pines, a stretch of forest locals talk about with a lowered voice and a quick glance over the shoulder, as if the branches themselves might lean in to catch their words. Some counties have ghost stories. We have warnings. They aren't told to scare children into obedience. They're told because they've kept people alive. People here don't fear the forest out of superstition. They fear it because it has earned fear the way a predator earns the silence of the woods around it. My cabin lies 3 miles up an old logging road that twists like something trying to free itself from the earth. Most of the year it's empty, except for me, but every now and then, locals stop by to report something strange, lights not belonging to campers, a scream carried upslope with no echo, a shadow that crossed the trail too tall and too fast to be human. I used to file these as stress, misidentification, imagination. But the longer you work here, the more you learn that dismissing fear can get you killed faster than believing in it. My first encounter with the kind of fear that lodges itself in the mind so deeply it becomes part of your breathing happened 10 months into the job. It was winter. The kind of brittle, silent cold that steals sound and sinks into your bones. I had been responding to a call about a missing trapper, an older man named Whitaker who lived alone, deep in the valley. He knew the land better than any map, better than any ranger. And although he came into town only twice a year, people trusted him like they trusted the seasons. So when he didn't return after a storm, folks worried. I snowshoed out to the ridge where his last marker pinged, radio crackling with bursts of static every few yards. By the time I reached his cabin, the sun was sinking, painting long horizontal stripes of pale light through the pines. The door hung slightly open, snow drifting across the threshold. Inside, everything looked undisturbed. Firewood stacked, coffee tin sealed, bed neatly rolled. But there was one thing that didn't fit. A single line of melted snow tracking from the doorway toward the back of the cabin, like something wet had walked in, paused, and changed its mind. I followed the trail outside where the snow deepened into a soft blue shadow. That's when I heard it, the first knock. It echoed across the trees. A single hollow tap. Measured. Deliberate. Too slow to be wood falling. Too heavy to be a branch. I froze, listening. The forest stayed still. Then another knock came, farther away but unmistakable. 3 taps this time, spaced strangely, as if someone or something was trying to mimic the pattern of human knocking without understanding the rhythm. I called out for Whitaker, my breath fogging in the cold. No answer. Just the pines shifting slightly, like an exhalation. Fear didn't hit all at once. It seeped in, a quiet unease wrapping around the base of my spine. I scanned the tree line with my flashlight, watching the beam slice through drifting snow. Nothing moved. No tracks. No prints. No sign of Whitaker. And then a third knock, closer than the others. I felt it in my chest more than heard it, like a hand pressed flat against a door I hadn't realized I was standing behind. I swallowed, tried to rationalize it. Frozen wood contracting, a distant tree fall, some kind of creature testing its environment. But every explanation felt thin, like a lie told to children to keep them from looking under the bed. That night left a mark on me, But it wasn't the only strange thing I encountered in the Bitter Pines. Not by a long shot. Over the years, stories collected around me the way frost collects around needles. Slow, quiet, inevitable. And I came to understand that out here, fear is not a single moment or a single sound. It's an accumulation, a layering, a slow recognition that the forest knows you more intimately than you know yourself. Locals whisper about the spirits of the pines, and I used to think they were talking in metaphor. But people don't whisper metaphor. They whisper memory. Like the story of the boy who followed laughter into the dark. Laughter that sounded almost human but thinner, like it had been stretched too far across a mouth too wide. They found him sitting at the base of an old cedar, eyes open, breath calm, as if he were listening to something none of them could hear. Or the woman whose scent of pine tar clung to her clothes for weeks after something walked past her tent. Not touched it, not brushed against it, just passed. She said the air thickened when it did, drying out her throat like she'd inhaled dust from a long-sealed cave. People in town don't tell these stories for entertainment. They tell them for survival, but the one that stays with me most, the one that changed me in a way I still haven't explained to anyone, happened 2 summers ago. A night that shifted something in my understanding of the world, something I've been trying to forget but can't. And though I've told no one, the forest reminds me. It always reminds me. I had been patrolling near the old mining shaft, a place we keep closed off because the ground gives way without warning. Even the animals avoid it. The trail leading there has this stillness to it, like someone pulled all the sound out of the air and left the silence behind as a warning. That night, the temperature dropped too fast, as if something had inhaled all the warmth. I radioed in my position, tightened my coat, and headed east along the tree line. That's when I spotted a light, dim, swaying, like a lantern held in an unsteady hand. It moved between the trees with a strange rhythm, almost limping. No campers were supposed to be in that zone, no hikers, and certainly no lanterns. I called out. No answer. The light paused, then continued deeper into the woods. Part of me knew not to follow. That part was small, instinctive, the animal part of the brain that understands the forest in ways logic can't. But the ranger in me, the part trained to respond to help, stepped forward. That's the part of me the forest takes advantage of. I moved toward the light, watching it flicker between the trunks like a heartbeat. The closer I got, the colder the air felt, until the hairs on my arms stood rigid beneath my sleeves. My breath grew shallow. Something in me felt wrong, like I was walking into a memory that didn't belong to me. When the light stopped, I stopped too. It hovered near a break in the pines, illuminating nothing around it, almost suspended. Then it swung toward me, slow, deliberate, and the woods went so quiet that my pulse became the only sound left. That was when I realized who the lantern belonged to, or rather, who it didn't, because there was no figure holding it, just the light, suspended in the dark, and behind it a shadow too large and too still to be human. My throat tightened, every instinct screaming to run. But fear can freeze you just as effectively as cold. The shadow didn't move, the light didn't dim, and the forest, every branch, every needle seemed to lean in, waiting. That was the moment the first real doubt entered my life as a ranger. Not fear, not panic, doubt. Doubt that the rules of the world worked the way I had been taught. Doubt that logic had any place here at all. And doubt, I've learned, is where the forest begins its work. Because what I saw next, what stepped between me and that floating light, changed everything I believed about the Bitter Pines. It stepped forward without sound, as if the forest itself bent around it to let it pass. The lantern's glow brushed its outline just long enough to show me that whatever it wasn't built the way a person is built. Its shoulders were too broad, its head too high, its posture too still, as if carved from the dark rather than standing within it. For the first time in my life, I wished the light were brighter. I needed definition, edges, something certain. But the lantern offered none. Instead, it flickered once, then steadied, revealing a pair of eyes fixed on me, pale, reflective, almost frosted looking, like light passing through winter glass. And they were too far apart, too high up, too unblinking. There are moments in the woods when your senses argue with each other. Your eyes insist on one truth while your mind protests with everything it has. This was one of those moments. My vision told me I was staring at something upright, massive, and waiting. My mind insisted it was only a trick of light, a distortion, a trick of fear. But fear doesn't make shadows breathe, and this one did. Warm breath rolled out from the dark mass, fogging in the cold air. Slow. Controlled, too steady for panic, too patient for accident, and the smell, damp soil, old bark, the scent of something that had been underground too long, hit me with a force that made my knees weaken. I tried to speak, my lips parted, but my voice stayed caught somewhere behind my ribs. And then with emotion so quiet I felt it more than saw it, the shape shifted its weight, and I broke. Not into a sprint, not immediately. The first motion was just a step backward, then another, slow enough to pretend I was still a ranger with authority, not prey trying not to draw attention. But instinct took over. My body turned, my legs moved, and suddenly I was running, branches scoring at my jacket as if reaching to pull me back toward the thing I'd left behind. The lantern light didn't follow, but the silence did. That silence chased me harder than anything else could have. It stretched behind me like a net, waiting for me to stumble, fall, disappear into it. The forest absorbs sound on still nights, but this was different. This was the kind of quiet that feels intentional, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what I would do. By the time I reached the ridge, my lungs were screaming and my vision had narrowed to a tunnel. I didn't stop until the first hint of moonlight broke through the branches overhead. When I dared to glance back, the pines behind me stood motionless, the darkness undisturbed. Nothing pursued me, nothing chased, but the forest had already followed me home. That night, lying in my cabin with the lantern dimmed and the wind sliding under the eaves, I kept replaying the shape I'd seen, the impossible height, the deliberate breath, the frozen eyes. Logic told me it could have been a bear rearing up, a moose distorted by distance, even a trick of my own shaking nerves. But I knew better. My body had known before my mind did. Fear like that doesn't come from misunderstanding. It comes from recognition. For weeks after, I tried to bury the memory under routine. I patrolled the usual trails, fixed broken markers, hauled debris from storm runoff, but every path carried echoes of that night. Every cluster of shadows looked assembled, waiting. Every snapped branch sounded like something too heavy to be deer. And the forest noticed my shift. Animals I used to see regularly, elk, fox, even the occasional bobcat, stopped appearing along their usual paths. The woods grew quiet in unfamiliar ways, like something large had staked a claim deeper in the valley. And then the locals started talking. Not openly, not in full stories, in fragments, half-whispered warnings at the general store, quiet mentions of tracks too large and too deep to belong to normal wildlife. Someone said they'd heard a howl at dusk that wasn't coyote, wasn't wolf, wasn't known. They said it sounded almost human, but longer and wrong. I didn't ask questions then. I wasn't ready for the answers. The second story in this line of encounters began with a smell, something sharp and metallic like rusted iron mixed with wet stone. I caught it one morning near Pine Needle Creek, a place known more for trout than for trouble, but the air felt different that day. Heavy, watching. Whenever I sense danger now, it starts with temperature. Not obvious cold, more like a vacuum, an absence, as if the air pulls backward from the world. That morning I felt it creeping over my skin even before I saw the tracks. Huge tracks, too far apart, too deep, and angled wrong, like the foot wasn't meant to walk flat on the ground. I crouched beside one of them. The print spanned nearly twice the width of my hand. Snow melted slightly at the edges, as though warmth still lingered from whatever made them. But what froze me wasn't the size. It was the direction. They led toward the creek, but they did not come back. Nothing moves into freezing water without leaving a return trail. Not bear, not moose, not anything that values its life. Yet the tracks went straight into the current and vanished. I stood there far too long, sensing something beneath the soft gurgle of the creek. A thrum, a vibration I could feel through my boots, like something big shifting under the earth. I started backing away, slowly, scanning the tree line. That's when I heard my name, not yelled, not whispered, spoken softly as if breathed into my ear by someone standing inches behind me. I spun so fast I nearly lost balance. No one was there. Only the pines, still and unmoving. My heartbeat pounded in my throat. I stepped back again, and the voice returned, this time from the opposite direction. And it wasn't my name exactly. It was the shape of my name. The sound of someone trying to say it. A low, gravelly rasp that dragged across each syllable like claws over stone. I had never run from a sound before. I always thought running was the surest way to draw the attention of anything with predatory instinct. But the voice didn't sound like a predator. It sounded like something learning. My instincts rebelled. My legs moved before I could think. I sprinted through the trees, stumbling over roots, branches, clawing at my jacket. The smell of rusted iron rose behind me, stronger, sharper, choking. And then something else joined it. Breath. Hot breath. At my back. I broke out of the tree line near the ranger station, gasping, dizzy, shaking so hard I had to steady myself against the porch railing. I waited for something to emerge behind me. A figure, an animal, the thing that had spoken. But nothing came. The pines looked normal. The air returned to stillness. The only sign that anything had happened was the sound of the creek. Steady, unbroken, as if the forest had swallowed every other noise whole. That was the second time the bitter pines took something from me. The first time they took my certainty. The second time they took my sense of safety. The third time, the story I've hesitated to tell anyone, it took something deeper. Something I'm not sure I'll ever get back. Because the third encounter wasn't with sound or sight. It was with something older, something buried, something that wanted to be seen, and it started in the caves. The caves were the one place I always avoided unless duty forced me there. Even before everything that happened in the bitter pines, caves unsettled me. Something about the air, the weight of the world pressing down overhead, the muffled heartbeat of dripping water echoing through stone. You can't tell direction from sound in a cave. Can't smell weather changes. Can't sense movement the way you can beneath the sky. Underground, the world becomes blind. And if you stay long enough, you start to understand how small you really are. I didn't intend to go inside that day. I only wanted to inspect the collapsed entrance near Black Hollow, a cavern system sealed decades ago after a group of teenagers went missing inside. They had been part of a local tradition, kids daring each other to go deeper each year, testing how far their courage would carry them before darkness turned them back. One year, darkness didn't give them back at all. Locals still leave flowers there every October. I arrived mid-afternoon, sunlight thin and silver between the clouds. The air felt wrong the moment I stepped onto the old trail, still heavy, almost damp. The pines surrounding the clearing leaned in a way that made the cave mouth appear deeper than it was, as if the forest were hiding it or protecting it. The boards sealing the entrance looked untouched since the last inspection, solid, weather-darkened, nailed tight. But the ground was disturbed. A line of fresh prints, barefoot, led toward the sealed entrance. Human-sized. Adult. Deep impressions, as if whoever made them carried significant weight or walked with deliberate force. They stopped right at the boards. No turnaround, no retreat, and no prints leading away. I crouched, touched the nearest track. The soil was cool but not fully settled, as though the imprint hadn't been there long. My thoughts began to churn. Hiker, trespasser, lost camper. But the temperature of the soil told a different story. It was too cold, colder than the surrounding ground, colder in an unnatural way, like something had drained the warmth from it. A familiar tension wound around my ribs, the quiet unease that preludes danger. I stood, scanning the clearing. The trees stared back, unmoving. No wind, no bird call, not even the scurry of small animals. The forest was watching again. When I approached the boards, the scent hit me. Earth, wet stone, and something faintly metallic beneath it. The same smell I'd noticed at Pine Needle Creek. The same smell that signaled something else had passed here. I kept one hand near my radio as I pressed against the boards. They didn't budge. Whatever made those prints didn't force its way inside. But something else caught my attention. A sound, not a knock, not a voice. This was subtler, a slow, steady tapping like water dripping in rhythm. Except caves don't drip in rhythm. Water in caves is chaotic, unpredictable, shaped by cracks in stone and time. But this was patterned, intentional. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Long pause, tap. I froze, listened. The pattern repeated. Same spacing, same rhythm, as if someone or something down in the sealed darkness was knocking back. I stepped away so fast, I nearly tripped. My pulse hammered against my throat. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to analyze, to be a ranger, and not a terrified animal. But logic had limits out here. I'd learned that already. I radioed headquarters, keeping my voice steady as I reported possible trespassing signs and an anomalous sound. They told me to return to base and wait for a team. I didn't want to turn my back on the cave, but staying felt worse, like waiting for something below the boards to finish its message. I walked backward for the first 30 feet, eyes locked on the sealed entrance. The tapping continued, becoming softer with distance until the forest swallowed it completely. I didn't breathe easier. Not even after the sound vanished. Not even after the trees regained their normal posture. Fear lingered with me the entire hike back. That night, headquarters radioed again. They sent a team, they inspected the site, and they found nothing. No prints, no tapping, no scent, not even disturbed soil. As if the forest had erased the evidence the moment I left. I didn't argue, didn't insist. The other rangers didn't laugh. This forest had taught them when to stay quiet, but they didn't believe either. Not fully. The Bitter Pines keeps its secrets unevenly. Sometimes it leaves traces. Sometimes it removes them. Sometimes it shows you things and hides them from everyone else. And that unevenness, that's what breaks your sense of reality more than anything else. Weeks passed, but the cave followed me. At night, I dreamed of it, the boards, the dark behind them, the rhythm of that tapping echoing through my head like a coded warning. I'd wake with my breath caught in my chest, unsure whether the sound had been in the dream or in the cabin itself. One night, I learned the answer. It was near 3 a.m. when I snapped awake, heart pounding, every instinct screaming. I didn't know why. The room was dark, silent. I lay still, listening. The cabin creaked around me, settling from the cold. The stove ticked softly as its last ember cooled. My breath came slow and foggy. And then I heard it. Tap. Not from the dream, not from memory. From inside the cabin. I sat up, every nerve electrified. My ears strained. My mind raced. Tap, tap. Not loud, not aggressive. Just familiar. The same rhythm, the same pattern, the same deliberate spacing I'd heard at the cave, except now it was closer. It was in the room. I reached for my flashlight, fingers trembling. The beam cut across the cabin. Empty floor, packed gear, desk, stove, boots by the door. Nothing moved. Nothing made sense. Tap. Against the wood of the wall, near the back door. I stood slowly, flashlight shaking. Part of me wanted to call out. Another part, the part that understood survival, stayed silent. My boots barely made a sound as I stepped toward the noise, heart hammering hard enough to blur my vision. When I reached the back door, I pressed my ear against the cold wood. Silence, a silence so deep it felt unnatural. Then, tap, tap, right against the other side. I stumbled back, breath catching. My mind scrambled for explanations, branches, animals, shifting temperatures, but nothing matched the rhythm. Nothing matched the intelligence behind it. I reached for the doorknob. My hand hovered. Something in me, something ancient, refused to turn it. That hesitation saved me, because the tapping stopped, and something breathed on the other side instead. Not animal breath, not human breath. A slow, too deep inhale, like air being pulled into a hollow space. Then an exhale that smelled of wet earth and stone, cave, air. The same scent I'd smelled at Black Hollow, the same scent near the creek, the same scent around the figure with the lantern. My skin crawled, my muscles locked. I forced myself to step backward. The breath on the other side of the door drew closer. Slow, intentional, curious. I couldn't move. Fear pinned me as effectively as any trap. I watched the door, waiting to see the handle turn or the wood bow inward. But instead of forcing its way in, the thing did something worse. It spoke, not clearly, not a word, not even a real sound. A low, dragging rasp murmured through the crack beneath the door. It shaped itself around my name, not fully, just enough to let me know it remembered me, just enough to let me know it had followed me home. My breath shook so violently I nearly dropped the flashlight. The cabin felt smaller, walls pressing inward, roof lowering, as if the forest itself crouched over me. Then, as suddenly as it began, the breath stopped. Silence fell. Thick, absolute. I waited. 1 second. 10, 30. No movement, no sound, nothing. When I finally forced myself to open the door, because some part of me needed to confirm it wasn't still standing there, the night air rushed in, cold and sharp. The forest lay still and empty. No footprints, no scent, no signs, but the tapping remained burned into my memory, and the breath and the way it shaped my name. The third story of the Bitter Pines wasn't just an encounter, it was a message. And it wasn't finished with me yet. After that night, sleep became a negotiation with fear. Every dusk felt like a question the forest asked me. Would I open the door if it knocked again? Would I answer if it whispered? Would I acknowledge the thing that had followed me out of the caves, across the creek, through the trees? I spent mornings trying to regain control, checking trail cams, combing the forest for tracks, radioing in patrol logs in a tone that sounded steadier than I felt. But the forest knew. It sensed the thin crack in my composure. The woods pressed closer every day, branches hanging lower over familiar paths, wind carrying the faint smell of stone and wet earth even when the skies were dry. Fear doesn't announce itself with a scream. It arrives quietly, wears normal moments like a mask. By late summer, I'd begun avoiding the back door altogether. I ate standing up. I kept the flashlight within reach at all times. I flinched at the sound of pine cones falling from branches. My reflection in the cabin window looked older, hollowed out, strained by something that didn't leave bruises, but still left marks. The fourth story began during a late afternoon patrol near Ridgewater Bluff, a high outcrop overlooking miles of trees. On clear days, the horizon looks like broken waves of green under a blue sky. I used to go there to breathe, to feel distance, to remember that the world was bigger than the things that stalked its shadows. But that day, the bluff felt different, off. The air pressed strangely against my skin, not cold, not warm, just heavy, thick, as if the forest was gesturing for silence. Even the wind, usually sharp along the edge, didn't touch the ledge. It curved around me. I found the first sign near the tree line, claw marks on a boulder. 3 deep grooves spaced too far apart for any known animal. Fresh, clean. The sort of marks made not in rage, but in intention. Below them, a tuft of dark, coarse hair caught in the lichen. I crouched. My fingers hovered over the strands, but didn't touch. Something stopped me, not fear exactly, but instinct, a warning rising from a part of me that felt older than logic. Behind me, the trees shifted. Not wind. Not animal movement. A presence. I turned slowly, muscles tight. The forest was still, silent, but something watched. I felt it studying the back of my neck the way a hand might hover above skin without touching it. I scanned the trunks, searching for shape. Tall shadow, pale eyes, movement, nothing. Yet the sense of being observed thickened, pushing against me like a physical weight. My breath shortened. The ridge suddenly felt too exposed, too open, too vulnerable. I stepped backward toward the path, keeping my gaze on the tree line. That's when the smell hit me. The same smell, metal, stone, damp earth, cave breath, from the forest behind the bluff. The thing hadn't stayed near Black Hollow or the creek or my cabin. It was roaming, tracking, testing boundaries, watching how far it could come before I broke. And it wasn't finished. I moved down the path at a controlled pace, radio in hand, though I didn't call for backup. What could I say? That the air felt wrong? That the forest was watching me? That something possibly from the caves had learned my name? Nothing that crawls inside the cracks of fear can be neatly logged in a report. I reached the trail junction and paused. A faint sound drifted through the trees behind me. Soft, almost delicate. Not a knock this time, not breath, something new. A low, drawn-out hum, vibrating just enough to stir the fine hairs along my arms. A hum that sounded almost like an attempt at speech. I tightened my grip on the radio. Didn't turn around, didn't answer. Sometimes survival is knowing which questions you shouldn't respond to. When I made it back to the station, the hum still echoed in my skull, a faint vibration that left me nauseous. I checked the perimeter twice before closing myself inside the cabin. That night, I kept every light on and waited for the tapping. It didn't come. Neither did the breath. Neither did the voice. Sometimes the absence of fear is more terrifying than fear itself. The fifth encounter came 3 days later, this time not from sound or scent, but from something the forest left behind. I was patrolling near Lone Buck Meadow, a clearing so quiet you can hear insects moving through the grass when the wind stops. I pushed through the last line of trees, expecting the wide open field. But the meadow was not empty. At the center stood a cairn, stones stacked into a tall, narrow tower that hadn't been there the day before. The bottom stones were large enough that I would have needed another ranger to help me lift them. The top stones were smaller, arranged in a spiral pattern that made the tower look almost like a spine. But what froze me in place wasn't the stone. It was what lay embedded in the middle of the tower. My flashlight. The same one I'd dropped near the back door the night I'd first heard the tapping inside the cabin. The same one I had assumed I'd misplaced or kicked under a bunk. It was wedged between the stones, still streaked with the mud from that night. My pulse hammered so hard my vision blurred. Something had taken it. Something had carried it. Something had built a monument with it. And the cairn wasn't random. It was placed in a direct line with the cave, and the ridge, and the creek, and my cabin. 4 points, a straight path, a pattern, a map of me. The forest around the meadow felt alive with attention. I could almost feel the trees leaning in, breathless, waiting for my reaction. My throat tightened, my hands shook. I stepped toward the cairn cautiously, scanning the tree line for movement. The air trembled, just slightly, as if something enormous exhaled from deep underground. And then I saw the prints, huge, deep, spaced wide apart, circling the cairn, stopping behind it, facing my flashlight, as if observing it, as if understanding it, as if remembering the night I dropped it. Fear rolled through me, slow and cold, a fear that didn't shout but whispered. It knows you. It watches you. It learns you. My radio crackled then, sharp, sudden, exploding through the silence. I spun so fast I nearly fell. Static hissed, then a voice broke through. But it wasn't a ranger. It wasn't a frequency I recognized. It wasn't even fully human. A low rasp pushed through the speaker, forming broken syllables. My name attempted. Misshapen, bent. Like cave air trying to imitate sound it barely understood. The same voice that had whispered beneath my cabin door. My legs almost gave out. I shut off the radio. I didn't trust the silence. I didn't trust my breath. I didn't trust anything in that meadow. Slowly, step by step, I backed away from the cairn. My eyes never left it. When I finally reached the tree line, I turned and walked quickly, branches snapping beneath my boots. Only when I was a quarter mile away did I allow myself to run. Not toward safety, not toward answers, just away from the thing I could no longer rationalize. Because by then, I finally understood something I'd been refusing to accept. This thing wasn't territorial. It wasn't hunting. It wasn't curious. It was following me, tracking my routes, visiting my cabin, watching my patterns, learning my name, leaving signs, building structures, repeating rhythms. It was interacting, and the bitter pines were letting it. That realization twisted something deep in my gut, because if something is watching you and learning you and mapping your movements, then it's waiting for something too. The sixth story began not with a sound or scent or stone. It began with a missing ranger. Her name was Marin. Not a rookie, far from it. She'd worked these woods for 11 years. long enough to read the forest the way other people read the weather. Steady voice, calm nerves, sharp thinking. The kind of ranger whose presence made the rest of us feel grounded. If a call came in about a missing hiker or a trapped climber, everyone breathed easier knowing Marin was en route. So when she didn't check in after her North Patrol, the air inside headquarters tightened like a fist. Missing hikers are expected. Missing campers too. But rangers don't disappear, not unless something wants them to. I volunteered for the search. Maybe I shouldn't have, but something in me felt responsible, like the forest had been inching closer to this moment, and I had stepped aside long enough for it to reach her instead. The others fanned out along standard search patterns. I took the ridge path, alone, because I knew that if the thing haunting my routes had taken her, it would expect me to follow the familiar grid. But the forest doesn't hide things in places where logic can find them. Quiet unease met me first, rising from the trees like a thin mist. The deeper I walked, the more the branches seemed to angle inward, not blocking the path, but guiding me into a narrower corridor. Pine needles muffled my footfalls. The forest dimmed. The wind stilled. Then came the scent. Wet stone, metal, earth, cave breath. It clung to the air in waves, rolling over me like invisible tides. My skin prickled. I slowed my steps, eyes scanning for the impossible prints I'd seen before, and then I found them. Huge, deep, unmistakable, and fresh. Pressed into soft soil so recently the edges still held moisture. They led off the path into a tight cluster of pines, where the shadows looked thicker than the shade should allow. I followed. Something primal inside me demanded I turn around, but my feet didn't obey. The tracks led into ground littered with fallen branches, some broken, some twisted, some arranged deliberately in patterns my brain tried to decode. I almost missed the first sign of Marin. Her radio, split open, casing cracked, antenna bent, lay beneath a snapped limb. Beside it, disturbed soil, a drag mark, a heel print. She had been taken alive. My breath seized. I crouched beside the print, fingers hovering above the indentation in the ground. She had fought. Hard. The depth of the mark told me she'd pushed off with force, digging her boot in as something pulled her sideways. Not backward, not forward, sideways, toward the trees, toward the dark. The forest around me tightened, not physically, emotionally. An atmosphere of pressure, a sense that something enormous waited just beyond the edges of my vision, watching me examine the evidence, watching me understand. Branches snapped deeper in the pines. Not random, not wind, a step, and then another. Slow, measured, heavy. Something approached. I rose to my feet, pulse thundering in my ears. My hand found the flare gun at my belt. A flare wouldn't kill anything, not something with that size and strength, but light disrupts many kinds of predators. And if the darkness was its ally, light might be my only weapon. The steps drew closer. Stopping just behind a thick stand of trees, I lifted the flare gun, aimed, waited, silence. Then, the sound of breath, low, deep, wet with the cold of caves. I didn't fire. Something told me not to, not yet. The breath changed, softened, shifted, and from the shadows, something slid into view. Not the creature, a hand. Marin's hand. Her arm extended from behind the tree, pale, shaking, fingers coated in dirt. She was alive. She had to be. My throat tightened. I stepped forward. Then her fingers curled, not toward me, but upward, slowly, like she was being pulled up by the wrist rather than reaching out for help. Her hand rose higher and higher, far higher than any human arm should reach. A cold shiver tore through me. Something was holding her. Something was lifting her. Something tall enough to raise her arm above my head from behind the tree. My voice cracked as I called her name. Silence answered. Then the creature stepped into view. Massive. Shadow-wrapped, breathing clouds into the cold air, not fully seen, not fully hidden, enough shape to prove its height, enough outline to confirm its unnatural proportions, enough detail to show pale, reflective eyes that caught the dim light and twisted it. Marin hung limp in its grasp, her face pale, expression frozen somewhere between terror and trance. Her lips moved. I thought she was speaking. I stepped closer. But the voice that came out wasn't hers. It was the creature's. using her mouth. A warped, dragging rasp shaped itself around my name. The same sound from the cave, the same sound at my cabin door, the same sound on the radio. But hearing it come from her throat broke something inside me. My knees weakened. My stomach lurched. My breath shook violently. The creature tilted its head, slow, bird-like, studying my reaction. Its fingers tightened around Marin's wrist. Her body lifted another inch, dangling weightless beneath its grip. And the forest leaned in, every branch, every shadow, every breath of wind, watching what I would do. My mind raced, my pulse hammered, the world condensed into a single instinct. Don't run. Not this time. Running had taught it something. Running had changed the pattern. Running had led it to follow me. But facing it, that was new, unknown, unmapped. Something deep in my spine told me this mattered. So I didn't lift the flare gun, I didn't reach for my radio, I didn't scream. I stepped forward, one slow, deliberate step. The creature's eyes widened just slightly as if surprised. Then Marin's mouth twisted open, farther than human jaws should open, a grotesque, unnatural stretch that revealed darkness inside instead of a tongue. And from that darkness, the creature used her voice again. This time, not my name. This time, something else. A single heavy word that scraped against the inside of my skull. Stay. Not a command, an invitation, a request, a test. I shook my head, breath catching. The creature responded instantly. Marin's body dropped, not tossed, not thrown, released. She crumpled into the pine needles, gasping, alive, conscious, shaking violently. I rushed forward, grabbed her under the arms, pulled her back. The creature didn't follow, didn't lunge, didn't scream. It stepped backward into the shadows, eyes fixed on me until the last moment before the forest swallowed it whole, and then it was gone. Completely. As if it had never stood there at all. Marin clutched my sleeve, voice trembling. It watched me, she whispered. It waited for you. Her words hollowed something inside my chest. I helped her to her feet. Together we stumbled back toward the trail. She leaned heavily against me, getting breath hitching, knees weak, but she was alive. That mattered more than anything. We didn't speak again until the station lights came into view, and even then, we didn't say much. How could we? Language was too small for what we'd seen. Later, when the others asked what happened, Marin only said 3 words. Not an animal. She never returned to duty. She left the Bitter Pines 2 days later and hasn't been back since. As for me, I stayed. Not because I'm brave. Not because I'm foolish. Not because I think I can stop whatever roams the caves and watches from the pines. I stay because some stories root themselves in you so deeply you can't pull away without tearing something essential loose, and because the forest hasn't finished with me. Some nights I still hear it. A tap against the back door, a breath sliding through the cracks, a voice shaping the beginning of my name. The Bitter Pines whisper differently now. Not in warning. Not in threat, in expectation. Something waits beneath those trees, something ancient, something patient, something that remembers me. And I know this. Whatever walked out of the caves, whatever has followed me through the seasons, whatever spoke through Marin's voice and learned the shape of my name, it isn't done. Not with me, not with these woods, not with the stories locals still whisper. I remain a ranger of these pines, their protector, their witness, their keeper. And every time I patrol under the endless canopy, every time the shadows stretch a little too long, every time the wind carries the scent of wet stone and metal, I'm reminded that the forest isn't just alive. It's listening. And someday, when the pines lean close enough, when the caves breathe deep enough, when the shadows finally step forward again, I'll answer. Because the spirits of the pines do not forget the ones who walk their paths. And I am one of them now. The night the wind refused to move was the night I understood that silence can stalk you as effectively as a predator. I remember standing alone beneath the pines, my breath drifting in a slow, uncertain cloud, the needles hanging unnaturally still, as if the forest itself was waiting for me to make a mistake. Fear, real fear, doesn't arrive with shouting or panic. It comes in a whisper. It brushes the back of your neck, steps beside you when you thought you were alone, and tells you something has changed. Something you can't name yet. Something watching. My name's Thomas. I'm 38 years old, and I've spent most of my life patrolling these woods. Miles of old-growth forest tucked into the northern Rockies, where the trees are older than the memories of the people who worship them. The locals call it Elk Valley, but the maps use its official name, Pine Run National Forest. If you ask me, neither name fits. Neither one captures the way the canopy traps the sky or how the ravines twist with the stubbornness of something that doesn't want to be understood. My job should have been simple. Patrol, check trail conditions, respond to calls, keep people from wandering too far from the path, help lost hikers, quiet the worries of tourists who swear they saw faces in the dark or heard something calling their name. I used to laugh at those stories, polite laughs, the kind you use when you want to comfort someone without feeding their fear. But eventually, the forest teaches you that what people feel is often truer than what they see. Before I joined the service, I grew up in a town just 15 miles from these woods. Pine Run is the kind of place where kids learn to track animals before they learn to ride bikes. My father taught me early. Pay attention to the wind, the birds, the rhythm of the woods. If the woods change that rhythm, leave. I didn't listen enough. Most of us don't until we're forced to. I started working in Pine Run when I was 22. Back then, the forest felt like a living friend. I loved the smell, damp bark, cold earth, that sharp sweetness of resin warming under the sun. Even the sound of branches creaking in the breeze gave me a sense of belonging. I thought nothing could shake me. I thought fear was just something people brought with them from the cities. And then the first story happened, the one that still crawls up my spine when the forest gets too quiet. It was late October, my first year on duty, and the nights had started getting cold enough to freeze the edges of the small ponds scattered across the valley. I was doing a routine check near the ridge trail when I heard it. 3 knocks, sharp, evenly spaced. Knock, knock, knock. They echoed across the canyon like someone hitting a hollow log. It was strange, but not alarming. Woodpeckers, falling branches, echo patterns. Plenty of things can sound like knocking if you're new here, and I was as new as anyone could be. But then came another set. Knock, knock, knock. Same distance, same rhythm, same timing. And that pattern, that exact unfaltering pattern, isn't something nature repeats without reason. I tried to convince myself it was a camper messing around, except the campsite was empty. There hadn't been visitors for days. The season was ending, the roads were icing over, and most of the town had settled into its winter habits. I called out just to be sure. "Park ranger, anyone out there?" The forest didn't answer. Not with animals rustling, not with wind bending branches, not with the usual chorus of night sounds that make the woods feel alive. Everything was still. Too still. Like the entire valley inhaled and decided not to exhale. I swept my headlamp across the ridge. Nothing but the silver-blue sheen of frost and the shadows of pines leaning over the trail. I stepped forward, and that's when I saw the tracks, fresh ones pressed cleanly into the thin snow. Not boot prints, not hooves. They were long, almost human-shaped, but too wide, too deep. Something heavy made them, something that walked upright. My mind tried to default to the rational. A bear? But bears don't leave tracks shaped like that. And they definitely don't knock 3 times in perfect rhythm. I crouched down to inspect one of the prints. The snow at the edges hadn't even begun to melt, which meant whatever left it had been there minutes ago, and that's when the cold air shifted. Not wind, just temperature. A sudden drop, the kind that crawls under your clothes and settles in your bones. I remember the prickling sensation spreading up my arms like frostbite, even though the night wasn't nearly cold enough for that. And then came the smell. It hit me so faintly I almost ignored it. A sour, musky scent, like wet fur left too long in a cave, mixed with something else, something metallic. I'd never smelled anything like it, not on a bear, not on a cougar, not on any animal I knew. Instinct told me to turn around. Training told me to investigate further. Instinct won. I stood, radioed in, and began backing down the trail, keeping my light on the ridge. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear breathing. All I heard was silence, pure, heavy silence, following me like a shadow that had chosen its target. When I reported the tracks, the chief ranger, an older guy named Rich, didn't look surprised. He didn't look scared. He just sighed, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Don't follow sounds in the ridge after dark, and don't go looking for what knocks. If it wants you, it'll find you." I remember feeling insulted, like he was mocking me. "What do you mean if it wants me?" He didn't answer. He only pressed his lips together and shook his head. That silence, the way he reacted, haunted me more than the knocks themselves. Because people here, especially the old-timers, don't ignore fear. They respect it the way sailors respect storms. If they refuse to talk about something, it's because they believe the thing listens. It wasn't until later, much later, that I understood Rich's warning. For a few weeks, nothing strange happened. I tried to brush off the experience as nerves, new job, new environment, overactive imagination. The mind can warp shadows into threats if you let it. But the forest has a way of reminding you when you're being arrogant. The next encounter came on a night I'll never forget, not because of what I saw, but because of what I heard, or thought I heard. The mind has trouble accepting contradictions, and nothing contradicts your understanding of reality like hearing someone whisper your name when no one is there. It was early December. Fresh snow had fallen the night before, laying down a soft, clean sheet across the valley. I was patrolling near the old service cabin, an unused building from the logging days, long before Pine Run became protected land. Most rangers refused to go near it after dark. I didn't understand why. I do now. When I reached the clearing, the snow around the cabin was untouched. No tracks, no animals, not even falling debris. Perfect. Untouched. Except for one thing. The front door, which should have been shut tight, was cracked open just enough to show darkness inside. I hadn't been there since autumn, and I was certain I'd locked it. I stepped toward the porch, testing each plank carefully, and then I froze. Because from inside that unlit cabin, down in the dark where my flashlight couldn't reach, I heard breathing, slow, raspy, uneven. Then it whispered, my name, not loud, not aggressive, just a whisper shaped like my name, as if someone behind the door had been waiting for me, studying how I moved, how I breathed, how I hesitated, and decided to speak in a voice it thought I would trust. I didn't trust it, but I also couldn't move. Something about that voice, its pitch, its rhythm, its strange, hollow quality, told me it wasn't human. Or if it was, something had hollowed it out. The forest around me seemed to tighten, leaning in, listening. I backed away from the cabin, my pulse rising, my breath fogging the cold air. I didn't run. Not yet. Running in the woods at night is how people break ankles, get lost, or disappear without a trace. I just stepped back. One foot, then another. Slow, measured, and the door closed. Not slammed. Not pushed by wind. It closed like someone or something was standing behind it, watching me leave. That was the moment I learned the forest doesn't always hide things. Sometimes it reveals them, just long enough to let you know you're not alone. I didn't sleep the night after the cabin incident. I sat in my truck until dawn, watching the tree line like something might step out, something shaped almost like a person, something that had learned my name because I'd wandered too close to a door that should have stayed closed. When the sun finally rose, I felt foolish, but only in the way fear makes you pretend the daylight fixed everything. It didn't. It just made the forest look normal again. I reported the cabin door to Rich, careful not to mention the whisper. I still wasn't ready to sound like I needed a psych eval, but he knew I was hiding something. He watched me with those pale eyes of his, the ones that seemed to miss nothing. After I finished, he walked to the window, staring at the vast stretch of trees outside, and said, "You're starting to hear it." "Hear what?" I asked. He didn't answer. This time it wasn't silence that unsettled me. It was the certainty in his voice, the quiet acceptance, like he'd already stood where I stood and decided long ago that some truths weren't worth naming. The strange encounters didn't stop. They just changed, as if something in the woods was testing new ways to get my attention. First it was sound, then scent, then touch. The second story, the one that reshaped how I sensed danger, started on a frigid January morning. The kinds of days when the snowpack feels brittle under your boots and the air burns your nostrils. I was assigned to check the Northern Trail system after a small avalanche had scattered debris over the main path. It was routine work, the kind you can do half asleep. For the first few miles, it was exactly that. Quiet, peaceful, predictable. Then the temperature changed. A cold wave swept over me, colder than the air around it, colder than anything natural. The kind of cold that doesn't come from ice or wind, but from something that feels intentional. It hit in an instant, so sharply that it took my breath. I stopped mid-stride, watching the steam of my breath crystallize into small shards, drifting lower than they should. That wasn't normal, not even at Pine Run's coldest. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Then I smelled it, an odor unlike anything I'd encountered in my years tracking animals. It wasn't the musky scent of elk or the carrion tang of cougar kills. It was heavier, earthier, tinged with something sweet and rotten at the same time, like soil dug up from a grave soaked in something old and decayed. My instinct said leave, but I didn't. That was my mistake. The smell intensified as I walked deeper into the northern basin. The area was known for strange echo patterns. Sound bent unnaturally there. Even normal noises came back distorted, like they'd traveled through something dense. Locals avoided the basin. Hunters refused to track game near it. I'd always chalked that up to superstition. But superstition starts making sense when the forest communicates with you in ways that reality doesn't support. I reached the dried creek bed when I saw them, an entire row of trees with their bark peeled away in perfect vertical strips. Clean, even, uniform. No claw marks, no chew patterns, no burn residue, just long, smooth openings exposing pale wood beneath. I crouched to touch one. It was warm. Warm. In 20-degree weather. The moment my glove brushed the exposed wood, a tremor ran up my arm, not painful, but jarring, like a low hum vibrating under my skin. I yanked my hand back, my chest tightening. And then I heard it, a deep exhale coming from the trees themselves. Not wind, not movement. An exhale, like something living was hiding inside the trunks, letting out a breath after being disturbed. My rational brain fought for control. Maybe temperature pockets, maybe sap reacting to cold, maybe. But then the trees inhaled, and the sound wasn't human, but it wasn't purely animal either. It was a blend of both, a long, slow draw of air that felt wrong, like it was learning how lungs should work. The forest around me stilled again, the way it had on the ridge that October night. Snow suspended in the air, every sound, every natural sound cut off. I took one step back, then another. My boots cracked the top layer of frost. The inhaling stopped. Silence. Not relief. Waiting. Then something inside the peeled trees knocked. Not woodpeckers, not falling branches, not sap cracking, but knuckles. 3 of them. Knock. 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 Not on one tree, but echoed down the entire row as though something moved from trunk to trunk, wrapping the inside shells as it passed. I ran. Every instinct I had screamed at me to get out of the basin. My breath burned. The forest warped in my peripheral vision. The shapes of branches elongating, shadows shifting like limbs reaching for me. The smell chased me, clinging to the air, thickening as I sprinted through the trees. My lungs begged for warmth, but the cold pressed deeper, numbing my fingers, my legs, my thoughts. By the time I reached the main trail, the warmth snapped back. The smell disappeared. The forest exhaled softly as though satisfied. I bent over, hands braced on my knees, trying to catch my breath. When I reported the peeled trees to Rich, he didn't ask for details. He didn't ask about the knocking. He didn't even ask if I was okay. He just said, "The basin woke up again. It does that some years." "What's in there?" I asked. He lifted his coffee mug, shrugged once, and said, "Depends who you ask. My grandfather believed it was the place spirits used to come through. Hunters say it's where the forest heals itself. Loggers used to swear something lived in the trees, moving among them like veins." "And you?" He met my eyes. I think people see patterns where they need them, but you need to stay out of that basin. I wanted to argue, not out of pride, but because something inside me refused to accept that explanation. Spirits, healing forests, living trees, all of it felt like he was giving me tales instead of truth, old stories instead of real warnings. And I could feel it now. Something had locked onto me. The forest had turned its attention my way. For weeks, I tried to shake it, bury myself in routine, check trail cams, survey storm damage, respond to the occasional lost snowshoer, pretend everything was fine. It worked, until I noticed the footprints. Not the wide, heavy tracks I'd seen near the ridge. These were different, smaller, more human-like, but they followed me, everywhere. On patrol routes where no one should have been, near ranger stations miles from any public access, around my cabin, pressed into the snow in a slow, thoughtful circle, like something had walked around it again and again, studying how I lived. The worst moment came when I found them leading right up to my window. One set stopping inches from the glass and another set leading back into the woods, as if two things had arrived. One had stayed, one had gone. I felt something break inside me that day. Not fear, but certainty. The certainty that I understood the forest, that I knew its rules, that I belonged to it as much as it belonged to me. The truth was different. I wasn't part of the forest. I was being tolerated. Barely. The next encounter, the one that still wakes me up at night, happened after a call from dispatch. 3 hikers had been reported missing near Marrow Cave, an old limestone hollow tucked deep in Pine Run's western ridge. The cave had a bad reputation. People said it shifted shape inside, that echoes got lost, that compasses spun, and that sometimes you could hear 2 sets of footsteps even when you were walking alone. I never believed those stories, until I smelled that scent again, the same sour, earthy, metallic odor from the basin, rolling out of the cave entrance like heat from an oven. I stepped toward the dark opening and the temperature dropped instantly. My breath froze in a thin sheet over my beard. Something moved deeper inside, something slow, heavy, dragging. I called out the hikers' names. The cave answered, not with their voices, but with mine. My own voice echoed back, a perfect copy, but distorted, like it had traveled through a throat that didn't know how to shape human sounds. It was slow, stretched at the edges, wrong in a way I felt in my bones. Help me. Not spoken, mimicked. That's when my denial snapped. The forest didn't want me to find the hikers. It wanted me to follow the voice. I stood at the mouth of Marrow Cave, my own voice still bouncing off the stone walls in that stretched, broken imitation. The sound shouldn't have echoed that way. Echoes fade. They don't change. They don't twist themselves into unfamiliar shapes. They don't drag syllables like something wet pulling across rock. I should have stepped back, should have radioed for backup, should have listened to every warning the forest had been whispering since autumn. But the hikers were missing, and responsibility can be heavier than fear. I clicked my flashlight on and stepped inside. The cave swallowed the beam instantly. Limestone shouldn't do that, shouldn't absorb light like it's hungry. But the darkness in Marrow Cave never behaved like ordinary dark. It had a thickness to it, like smoke without scent, like a presence waiting for the right moment to close in. The temperature dropped again. My boots crunched over frost lining the stone, even though it hadn't been cold enough outside for that kind of formation. The sound echoed forward, not back, like the noise wasn't returning to me, but being carried deeper into the cave by something that wanted it. After 30 feet, the cave narrowed into a low corridor. The air smelled stronger now. Wet soil, old fur, rusted iron. The metallic tang hit the back of my throat so sharply I coughed. The sound ricocheted strangely, splitting into 2 separate echoes traveling in opposite directions. I froze. 2 echoes shouldn't be possible unless there were 2 openings ahead, but there was only one. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, and my light finally illuminated something. Scrapes on the rock. Horizontal marks, long and parallel, carved deep enough to catch frost. Not claw marks, not tool marks. They were too uniform, too deliberate, like something had dragged itself along the walls using hands far larger than any person's. I swept the light across the chamber floor. Tracks, deep, wide impressions in the thin frost coating, the same shape as the ones from the ridge, too large to be human, too human-shaped to belong to any known animal. And beside them, smaller prints, 3 sets, moving aimlessly in circles, overlapping, like the hikers had run in confusion, unsure of which direction led out, or like they'd been chased. My stomach tightened. I moved farther into the chamber, calling out again, quieter this time. Hannah? Joel? Mason? Can you hear me? My voice died halfway through the room. Not faded. Died. Cut off like someone snapped their fingers and severed the sound midair. The cold deepened. My breath curled low to the ground instead of rising. And somewhere beyond the chamber, deeper in the cave, something exhaled. Slow. Heavy. Wet. I swallowed hard, stepping toward the tunnel where the sound had come from. As I moved, my hand brushed the wall, and I jerked away instantly. The stone was warm. Not just warm, fevered, pulsing faintly, like there was a heartbeat hidden in the rock, syncing itself to the rhythm of my breath. I felt my pulse stumble, almost matching the slow, unnatural throb beneath my palm. I pressed my back to the opposite wall, breathing shallow, trying to think rationally, but fear was tightening around my thoughts, wrapping itself like vines around a collapsing structure. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, not mine, not boots, not paws, bare feet, slapping against stone in irregular dragging patterns. One step normal, one dragged, one staggered, one slow, like something learning to walk or relearning. I angled my flashlight toward the tunnel, and the beam caught movement. Just a flicker, a shadow shifting against the rock. Too tall, too wide, too wrong. A deep groan rolled through the cave, low enough to vibrate my ribs. The air thickened, filling my lungs with a heavy pressure that felt like dread turning physical. I raised my radio to call for backup, and the cave mimicked the static before I even pressed the button. Not perfectly, like a child trying to imitate a parent's voice. Sharp crackles, broken bursts, a flattened echo of the frequency. Then it whispered through the static, Thomas. The way it stretched the name made my knees lock. My thumb hovered over the call button, but another realization stopped me. If whatever was in the cave could mimic my voice, what made me think the hikers hadn't heard the same thing? Maybe they'd followed it deeper. Maybe they thought help had arrived. Maybe that's why they never came back out. My pulse pounded hard enough to echo in my ears as I stepped into the next corridor. The walls tightened again, narrow, uneven, forcing my shoulders to turn sideways. The smell grew sharper. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied, though the beam seemed thinner, as if the dark were eating the edges. I moved slowly, one hand on the stone, one gripping my light. Then the wall shifted, not a cave-in, not movement, not settling rock. It shifted like it inhaled behind my palm. I stumbled forward, heart lurching. My shoulder hit the opposite wall, and this time the stone felt sticky, just a patch, small, like sap, warm sap, except caves don't produce sap. I lifted my hand and saw thick, amber-colored residue coating my glove. It clung like resin, smelled faintly like the forest floor after rain mixed with rust. I wiped my glove against my pants, but the residue smeared instead of coming off. My breath sped up. Panic threatened my control, rising like a tide. And then the tunnel opened into another chamber, and I found them. The hikers. At first I thought they were alive. They were standing, stiff, frozen, their faces pale and blank, eyes unfocused, but their bodies, God, something was wrong. Their limbs were coated in the same amber resin. Veins of it ran up their necks, across their cheeks, disappearing into their hairlines, like the cave had grown its own roots into them. Hey! I rushed forward. Don't move. I'm getting help. Mason's eyes twitched toward me. Not moved. Just twitched. A tiny, impossible flicker. Then his jaw cracked open, resin splitting, and a sound came out. Not his voice. Not any voice. A deep, gurgled inhalation, air sucking through resin. Hannah's head jerked unnaturally to the side, resin snapping like brittle twigs. Joel's fingers twitched, amber cracking around the knuckles. And then, from behind them, movement. Something tall stepped out of the far shadow. something hunched yet towering, covered in the same amber sheen as though it had crawled out of the cave walls themselves. Hair matted with resin hung from its shoulders. Its arms were too long, its chest too wide, its legs thick and covered in dark, wet fur. A yeti, not the clean white version from movies. This one was earth. This one was rot. This one belonged to the cave. Its eyes caught my flashlight. Amber, reflective, alive. It let out a sound that vibrated the chamber, half growl, half moan, half something so old it didn't fit any category of animal or legend. The cave walls seemed to lean toward it like they recognized their own. I stepped back, heart battering my ribs. The hikers moved as the creature moved, slow, jerking motions like puppets pulled by strings. Their eyes stayed vacant, but their bodies responded to its presence. That's when I understood. They weren't simply trapped. They were being kept. The creature stepped forward, head low, shoulders rolling. It sniffed the air. The sour, metallic scent thickened until I nearly gagged. My vision blurred at the edges, flashing white before clearing again. My instincts screamed at me to run. My training screamed at me to find a way out for the hikers. My fear screamed something else entirely. You entered its home. It lifted one massive hand, fingers curled, wet with resin, and the chamber trembled. The hikers' jaws unhinged. 3 voices, forced through broken throats, whispered together. Stay. Not a warning. A command. I turned and ran. The walls pulsed around me as I fled. Resin dripped from the ceiling, hitting my jacket with heavy, sticky thuds. The ground vibrated with the creature's lumbering steps, the sound growing louder, closer, as though it could move far faster than its size allowed. The corridor narrowed. My shoulder clipped stone. Pain shot through me. I stumbled but didn't fall. Behind me, something slammed into the cave wall, a roar shaking loose dust and pebbles. My light flickered wildly. The resin smell burned my lungs. My vision swam. Then the cold returned. Sharp. Violent. Chasing me like a tide. I burst out of the cave mouth, collapsing onto the snow outside. Fresh air filled my lungs, burning but clean. The sky overhead spun. My ears rang. My heart slammed against my ribs like a trapped animal. But the forest was silent, utterly silent. Not a sound came from the cave. Not footsteps, not breathing, not whispers, nothing. I scrambled backward, watching the darkness of the cave entrance, waiting for something to emerge. Nothing did. But the silence promised one thing. It wasn't done with me. Not yet. I didn't remember driving back to the ranger station. I only remembered the feeling, my fingers numb on the steering wheel, the world outside the windshield drifting in and out of clarity, like I was staring through water. My clothes were stiff with dried resin. Every breath carried that faint metallic taste. My mind replayed the hikers' faces, their stillness, their twitching, their hollow, resin-filled veins, as if it wanted to convince me it had all been real. But doubt crept in. Terror can warp memories. Fear can fabricate them. Maybe the darkness played tricks on me. Maybe the cold. Maybe panic. Maybe. That word is the most dangerous word in the woods. It makes you question what you know, makes you soften your edges, makes you walk toward danger when you should run. Maybe is the wedge that prees you away from your instincts. When I got back, Rich took one look at me and said nothing. He didn't ask, didn't need to. He just walked to his office, locked the door behind us, and handed me a thermos of something hot enough to burn. Drink, he said. I did, though the metallic aftertaste in my throat made it hard to swallow. When I finished, he sat across from me, arms folded, eyes steady. What did you see? I opened my mouth, but the story tangled itself the second I tried to speak it. The sound of my own voice inside the cave, the hikers standing like they'd been grown out of the rock, the creature, tall, resin-coated, everything in its posture saying mine. The warmth in the cave walls, the heartbeat, the footsteps. I told him everything, or almost everything. I didn't mention the part where the hikers' broken voices told me to stay. I wasn't ready to hear that sound out loud again. Rich listened without interrupting. When I finished, he rubbed a hand over his jaw and stared at the floor for a long moment, as if weighing truths he didn't want to speak. Finally, he said, "You're lucky you made it out." I laughed, bitter, shaky. I didn't make it out. I ran. Sometimes running is the smartest thing a man can do. He stood, walked to a shelf, and pulled down an old leather-bound notebook. I'd seen it before, tucked behind outdated wildlife logs. He set it in front of me, sliding it across the desk. "Read the last entry." I opened it. The handwriting was jagged, hurried. Dated 40 years ago. Ranger Samuel Reed, one of the veteran rangers who disappeared without explanation when I was a kid. The entry was short, but the words cut like splinters. The cave is not empty. It grows bodies. It mimics our voices to know us. If you hear yourself calling, do not answer. Leaving costs something. It will come for what it is owed. I read the lines twice, 3 times, then closed the notebook quietly. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Would you have believed me?" Rich countered. "No, not back then." "Did you ever go in?" I asked. He nodded once, eyes distant. "When I was young, lost 2 men that day, never found their bodies." I swallowed. "The hikers," he didn't answer. He didn't need to. Their bodies weren't coming back in a way anyone could recognize. I leaned forward, hands clasped tight. "The creature, what is it?" Rich exhaled slowly. "People call it a Yeti because they need a name, something to hang fear on. But that cave existed long before the stories, before the town, before any of us. And the things that live in old caves don't care what names we give them." "Have you seen it?" I asked. He hesitated. That alone was enough of an answer. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. "I've seen its shadows." The silence between us thickened. Not oppressive, just honest. The honesty that comes when 2 people finally admit they're far smaller than the thing watching them. "So what do I do?" I asked. "You stay out of that side of the forest," he said. "You don't answer voices that sound like your own, and if something starts following you, by sound, by scent, by tracks, you tell me." I nodded. But part of me knew it was already too late, because something was following me. That night, as I lay in my cabin, sleep refusing to come, I heard something outside, soft at first, quieted wind brushing pine needles, but wind has a rhythm. It moves, it builds, it fades. This did not. It was a slow crunch of snow, then another, then a long pause, then a second set, closer, then silence. I sat up, heart thundering, another crunch. Right outside the wall, I reached for my flashlight and aimed it toward the window, not shining it, just waiting, watching. The moonlight spilled faintly through the frosted glass. Nothing moved, then the scent hit me, the same sour, earthy, metallic scent from the cave. Faint, drifting, but unmistakable. My breath caught. A shadow shifted outside the window. Not a human shadow, too tall, too broad, shoulders hunched like something built for mountains, not for towns. Then lightly, something tapped the glass. Not a claw, not a branch, a knuckle, just once. I froze, my muscles locked, my throat tightened so hard I couldn't swallow. The tap wasn't meant to break the window. It wasn't aggressive. It was deliberate, a greeting or a reminder. Slowly, a smear of amber resin slid down the outside of the glass, catching the moonlight like a slick tear. I didn't breathe for almost a minute. When I finally dared to move, I reached for the radio with a shaking hand. "Rich," my voice cracked. No answer. "Rich, something's outside my cabin." Static. Then, through the static, my own voice repeated softly, "Outside. Cabin." Still stretched, still wrong, still hollow. I dropped the radio like it burned me. The shadow stayed by the window for a long time. It never knocked again, never pressed against the glass, never growled. It just waited. When dawn broke, the shadow was gone. But the footprints remained, those wide, human-shaped impressions leading from the tree line to my window, and another set leading away. The same 2 sets I'd found before. One coming, one going. Except the ones leaving turned toward a direction I didn't recognize. Not toward the forest. Not toward the trail. Toward a part of Pine Run that didn't exist on any official map. Rich came to inspect the tracks that morning. He knelt beside them, fingertips brushing the resin smeared in the snow. His breath left him in a slow, resigned sigh. "You need to leave for a while," he said. "I'm not abandoning my post." "You're not. You're surviving it." I shook my head. "If I leave, it'll follow me somewhere else. I saw what it did to the hikers, Rich. That thing wants something. I need to know what." He stared at me with an expression I'd never seen on him before. Fear. Real, unguarded fear. It doesn't want something, he said softly. It wants you. I swallowed hard. Why? He hesitated. Because you went into its home, because you left, because you weren't supposed to. A chill spread through my chest. What do you mean, not supposed to? Rich looked toward the tree line, his voice barely above a whisper. Things that enter Marrow Cave don't leave untouched. Something follows them out. A tightness gripped my lungs. Then how do I stop it? You can't, he said. But you can outrun it if you know where to go. I steadied myself. Where? He pointed toward the far ridge, the oldest part of Pine Run, the place locals never talk about except in hushed warnings, the place I'd never been assigned to patrol. The Pines of Stillwater, he said. If there's anywhere in this forest the cave fears, it's there. The way he said fears made my skin prickle. I took a breath, heavy and cold enough to burn. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over. It was only beginning. And I had to choose. Run from the thing following me or walk straight into the one place in Pine Run even the locals didn't whisper about. Both choices felt like walking into the dark. But the dark had already chosen me. I'd heard the name whispered by locals my entire life, always quietly, always with a glance over the shoulder after saying it. Stillwater wasn't on any official map, not under that name. The ridge had another designation in the government archives, something sterile and numerical. But the people who'd lived here for generations refused to call it anything but Stillwater. It had nothing to do with lakes, nothing to do with rivers, nothing to do with water at all. The name referred to the air, because up there the wind didn't blow. Ever. The pines stood perfectly still, no matter the season, no matter the storms raging miles away. Nothing in that stretch of forest moved unless you moved it. And even then, people said branches sometimes snapped back into place like they'd never been touched. I should have felt dread, but what I felt instead was a strange, desperate pull. If the cave wanted me, if the creature wanted me, then maybe Stillwater was the only place in the forest that wasn't bending in that direction. Or maybe it was the place where the truth waited. Either way, I needed answers. I left at dusk, my truck climbing the old service road that wound through the western ridge. Snow dusted the ground, thin enough to let the earth show through in streaks of brown and gray. The forest on either side of the road leaned inward, boughs heavy with frost, their branches creaking as if warning me not to go farther. After a mile, the trees began to change. Not visibly at first, something subtler. The spacing, the symmetry, the unnatural quiet between them. It was like stepping into a painting where someone had frozen the background mid-breath. Another half mile and the forest stopped making sound altogether. No crunch of tires on snow, no engine rumble, no jostling of gear in the back seat. My truck moved forward in complete, perfect silence, as if the world around me had taken a deep breath and forgotten how to let it out. I stopped at the base of the ridge where the old service road ended. Beyond it, the trail narrowed into an ancient footpath, barely noticeable under the snow. A wooden sign leaned crookedly against a pine, the letters carved so long ago they were worn smooth. Keep out, like that ever stopped anyone in Pine Run. I shouldered my pack, tightened my jacket, and stepped into Stillwater. The first thing I noticed was the temperature. It wasn't warmer or colder. It was the same. Exactly the same as the air at the base of the ridge. No drop, no shift, not even a degree. As if Stillwater existed in its own climate, untouched by the world below. The second thing I noticed was my breath. It didn't drift. It evaporated the moment it left my mouth, disappearing before it rose even an inch. Something about that made my skin crawl. I walked carefully, each boot pressing into snow that didn't make a sound. The pines rose around me like pillars, tall and straight, their needles stiff with frost yet unmoving. Not a twitch, not a rustle. And deeper in, I began seeing patterns in the branches, subtle curves and arches, repeating like the ribs of some long-buried structure beneath the forest floor. My thoughts kept circling back to the cave, to the hikers, to the creature, to the resin on my window. I needed to know why it came for me, why it mimicked my voice, why it followed my tracks. Stillwater felt like a place that held answers, Not safe answers, but answers. Halfway up the ridge, the world changed again. It began with a sensation across my skin, like static moving over my jacket, raising the tiny hairs on my arms. I stopped, listening hard. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, but I felt watched. Not stalked, watched. The way you might watch someone who doesn't belong. I turned slowly, sweeping my flashlight across the trees. That's when I saw them. Carvings. Rows of them. Deep cuts in the bark of the pines arranged in a spiraling pattern that wrapped around the entire trunk. Some were small notches. Others were long, curved strokes that formed symbols I didn't recognize, shapes resembling eyes or waves or open mouths. Most were old, decades at least. But some were fresh enough that the sap glistened around the edges, golden and sticky. Fresh enough that when I leaned close, I smelled something faintly sweet, like tree resin mixed with something else. Something I'd smelled before. Amber from the cave. My heartbeat quickened. A cold sweat broke across my neck. The markings weren't random. They were warnings or invitations. Above me, the canopy thickened, blocking out the last of the daylight. I kept climbing through a silence that pressed inward until my thoughts felt loud enough to echo. Then I reached the clearing. A circular patch of ground where the snow had melted away, revealing dark earth beneath. The trees bent inward at the edges, forming a perfect ring. And in the center stood something I couldn't explain. At first glance, it looked like a cairn, stacked stones forming a crude pillar about shoulder height, but the stones weren't loose. They were fused together, held by something hardened and amber-colored, something that had melted between the cracks and then solidified. Resin, the same resin from the cave, the same resin that streaked across my cabin window. A shiver crawled up my spine. I approached slowly, my boots leaving silent impressions in the dirt. As I got closer, I noticed something embedded in the resin. 3 somethings. Bones. Not animal bones. Human fingers. 3 of them, arranged like they were reaching out. My stomach turned. Behind me, snow crunched, except no sound was supposed to exist in Stillwater. No crunch, no footsteps, nothing. I spun around, flashlight slicing through the trees. Something stood at the edge of the clearing. Tall, broad, hunched. Its body was coated in hardened resin, cracks running along its arms and torso like dried mud. Its fur matted, stiff, colored dark by the amber that clung to it in patches. Its head hung low, one massive hand dragging against the ground. A rumble vibrated the air so deep I felt it in my ribs more than I heard it. The Yeti. The same presence from the cave. But different here. Weaker? Wounded? Maybe. Contained? Possibly. Its amber eyes flickered in the beam of my light, reflecting something older than the forest, older than the ridge itself. It took one step forward. The ground trembled. Resin cracked along its joints. Then a second step. I backed up, breath shaking. The creature's chest rose and fell with slow, heavy breaths. Each exhale blew a warm, sour wave of air across the clearing. I fought the urge to gag. Then it opened its mouth, and my voice came out. Help. Not the mimic from the cave. This was something else, a plea. For a heartbeat, confusion split my fear. Why would it ask for help? The creature staggered, one hand bracing against a pine. Resin shattered off its skin, falling like broken glass. Beneath the cracks, its fur was patchy, its muscles gaunt. It was dying. Stillwater was killing it. I didn't understand how I knew, but I felt it. Stillwater wasn't a sanctuary for me. It was a trap for the creature. This was where the forest had drawn a boundary, where whatever lived in the cave had no power. It stumbled again, sliding to one knee. Its breathing grew shallow, ragged. It lifted its head toward me, amber eyes dimming. Its mouth opened wider, and this time the voice that came out wasn't mine. It was the hiker's. 3 voices layered over one another, broken and desperate. Don't leave. My knees nearly buckled. I stepped back instinctively, shaking my head. The creature reached toward me with a trembling hand. For the first time, I saw the truth. It wasn't separate from the hikers. It wasn't controlling them. It was consuming them. And as the resin cracked along its body, flecks fell away, revealing something beneath. Human skin fused with fur, muscle fused with stone, bone wrapped in amber, shifting between shapes it didn't belong in, as if it had absorbed them, as if the forest had given it bodies to replace its own. Its hand collapsed into the dirt. Its body slumped, resin hardened across its back like a final shell. Stillwater was suffocating it, killing it, ending whatever the cave had turned it into. For the first time since Pine Run had turned on me, I felt the forest breathe differently, not with terror, not with hunger, with judgment. The creature let out one last sound, low, cracked, fading. A whisper, a word, not mine, not theirs. Run, I staggered backward, my breath froze midair again. The stillness of the pines closed in around the clearing. Something shifted above me, a ripple through the branches like the forest acknowledging what had just happened. The creature collapsed entirely, amber shell caving in. Stillwater had taken it. But the forest hadn't taken its place. That meant something worse was coming. Something that didn't fear Stillwater. Something that didn't need voices to follow me. Something the creature had been running from too. And whatever it was already in the woods. Watching. Moving. Following. I felt it before I heard it. A change in the air. A loosening of the stillness. The wind started again, but not from the ridge, from behind me. The wind returned like a warning, soft at first, almost tender, brushing the back of my neck with a cold I knew didn't belong to Stillwater, because Stillwater had no wind. None. Ever. The air there existed in a frozen kind of paralysis, a suspended breath that never released. But now it stirred, sliding through the pines with deliberate movement, a slow, creeping draft that came from the direction of the forest I just climbed through, meaning only one thing. Stillwater wasn't holding anymore. I turned slowly, every instinct ready to flee, but my legs refused to move at first. Fear does that. It's not always loud or frantic. Sometimes it's quiet in a way that clings to your bones, telling you to stand very still or risk breaking whatever fragile balance you've stumbled into. My flashlight beam cut into the dark stretch of trees I'd walked through. The trunks stood as still as before, but the air between them flickered in tiny shivers, like heat waves rising from asphalt. Except there was no heat, only the cold. Something was coming, something the cave feared. Something that didn't rely on mimicry or scent or amber resin to hunt. The creature in the clearing, the cave's creation, had warned me in its final breath. The word run hadn't been for itself. It had been for whatever approached now. My pulse hammered in my throat. I stepped back instinctively, boots sinking into the soft earth around the fallen creature's body. The amber shell around its torso cracked further as the last heat drained from it, brittle pieces falling away like shedding scales. Behind me, the pines swayed, not from wind, but from pressure. A force moving through them with weight and intention. My breath tightened. The temperature dropped again. The shiver in the air deepened into something audible, a faint, low tremor. Not a growl, not footsteps, a hum, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated my ribs and made my teeth click together. I'd never heard it before, but I knew, instinctively, that the creature in the cave had been afraid of this. Whatever was coming wasn't tied to the resin. Wasn't born of the cave, wasn't shaped by hunger. It belonged to the forest, the real forest. A gust of wind suddenly ripped through the clearing, snapping branches, scattering snow in violent spirals. I staggered, shielding my eyes. When the air stilled enough for me to see, something stood between the nearest pines. At first, I thought it was a burned tree trunk, tall, charcoal black, narrow and twisted. But it moved, slowly, unnaturally, its shape bending as if its bones were roots. I blinked hard, trying to force my mind to make sense of it. Then it unfolded. Two long, jagged arms extended outward, branching like dead limbs stretching to reclaim lost ground. Its torso was narrow, contorted, wrapped in something that looked like bark but pulsed like skin. Its legs were thick like tree stumps, ending in heavy root-like feet that sank silently into the earth. Its head, God, its head was wrong. It was tilted too far to one side, half the face sunk into the bark-like skin, the other half exposed, a smooth, pale oval with no features except a single black indentation in the center. Not an eye, not a mouth, just a hole, a hollow, a void. And from that void came the hum. Not loud, not angry, just constant, steady. It filled the air like pressure, like gravity. Like something older than the cave, older than Pine Run, older than anything with a heartbeat. The pines around the clearing leaned toward it as though acknowledging a returning presence. The creature from the cave, the dead thing beside me, cracked sharply as if reacting to the newcomer. Its amber shell shimmered, then shattered in a burst of brittle fragments, exposing its fused mass of fur, bone, and hardened resin beneath. The sight twisted my stomach, and the hum deepened. The forest felt alive, not alive like animals or plants, alive like consciousness. The hollow creature stepped into the clearing, each movement impossibly smooth. The hum crawled inside my head, vibrating behind my eyes, filling my lungs. My knees weakened, my vision blurred at the edges. Stillwater wasn't hurting it. Stillwater was its territory, its boundary, its throne. This thing was no yeti, no legend, no animal. It was the spirit of the ridge, the spirit of the pines, the thing the old-timers had always felt watching, the thing they never spoke of, the thing the cave creation had fled from, and which had now come for me. I stepped back, hands shaking uncontrollably. My flashlight dimmed, flickered, then sputtered out. Darkness pressed inward almost instantly. Only the creature's hollow face remained visible, faintly lit by some internal ember. Its head tilted, slow and uneasy, as if studying me. Then the hum shifted into something like speech. Not words, but a shape of intent, a questioning, a demand. My breath came shallow. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, but a different instinct held me still. The understanding that movement would ignite something I wasn't ready to face. The creature's branch-like arms lifted slightly, bending as though caught in a breeze that didn't exist. The clearing tightened around us. The pines seemed to hold their breath. A voice, not mine, not human, whispered inside my skull. "Why did you enter the cave?" Not spoken. Impressed. I gasped, clutching the sides of my head. The pressure increased. Images flashed behind my eyes. Marrow Cave, the amber resin, the hikers' blank faces, the creature's dying breath. Then the clearing, the cairn, the symbols on the trees. The forest was showing me its memory and its judgment. I forced myself to inhale. My voice was barely a whisper. I was trying to help them. The hum faltered, just slightly, enough to shift the pressure in the air. Then another impression came, sharper, cold, unresolved. "You brought it here." Not a question, a sentence. My lungs tightened painfully. I understood now. The cave creature, the yeti-shaped abomination, had followed me because my presence had marked a passage between territories. By entering the cave, I'd become a conduit for the thing inside it. Stillwater had suffocated the creature because it didn't belong. But its trail, the resin, the mimicry, the scent, had followed me out like a stain, a contamination. My chest heaved. I didn't know. The forest didn't care about excuses. Age doesn't negotiate with ignorance. The hum deepened again. The hollow creature stepped closer. Its void face hovered inches from mine, the cold radiating off it so intensely that moisture in the air crystallized between us. It was choosing, judging, determining whether I belonged to the cave now or to the pines. A terrible, instinctive dread filled my bones. The forest wasn't deciding whether to kill me. It was deciding where I should be kept, cave or Stillwater. Both were prisons. Both were ends. My breath trembled. My legs buckled. But then something changed. My hand brushed against my jacket pocket and hit the emergency flare I hadn't used during the search for the hikers. A small red tube. Standard issue. I'd forgotten it was even there. The creature's head twitched. The hum wavered. The temperature plummeted. Fire. The forest didn't fear caves, it feared fire. Or maybe it respected it. I didn't have time to decide. I yanked the flare free, struck the cap, and a burst of crimson flame roared to life, cutting through the stillness with violent color. The hollow creature recoiled, its branch-like arms snapped backward. The hum spiraled into a jagged screech that tore through the clearing. The pines leaned away, the ground trembled, the air itself bent, and I ran. The flare's light painted the forest in bloody strokes as I sprinted through Stillwater. Branches whipped beside me without making sound. The wind howled now, real wind, furious wind, raging through a place that had never known motion. The forest convulsed behind me. The hum rose into a furious crescendo. I ran until my legs burned, until my lungs threatened to collapse, until the world blurred into streaks of red, white, and black. The flare fizzled to half strength. My boots hit snow. Finally sound returned, the crunch echoing like a lifeline. The boundary broke behind me. Stillwater released me. And I didn't stop running until Pine Run Ranger Station came into view, lights glowing dim through the trees. I burst through the door, collapsing onto the floor, the flare hissing out in my trembling hand. Rich shot up from his chair, eyes wide. What happened? What did you see? I stared at him, throat tight, breath shuddering. And all I managed to whisper was, "The pines have a spirit." His face went pale. The kind of pale that comes with truths you hoped you'd never hear spoken aloud. He crouched beside me. And the cave? I swallowed hard. The cave is nothing compared to the forest. Is it coming? He asked. I shook my head slowly. No, he exhaled shakily, but it's watching, I continued, and it knows my name. The forest never fully returned to normal after that night. Pine Run felt different, like a veil had lifted, revealing something ancient beneath the soil. Something that tolerated us but never welcomed us. Stillwater remains silent, the cave remains breathing, and I remain here, a ranger still walking the trails, but never alone. Not anymore. Some nights, if the wind dies at the wrong moment, I feel the hum, not near, just in memory. A reminder. Respect the pines, respect the silence, respect the things older than your fear. Because out there, where the forest thickens and the world narrows into dark paths and old caves, the line between protector and prey becomes very thin. And the spirits of the pines, they never forget the ones who entered their domain and lived to whisper the stories.